Dr. Kotur, good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Sir, sir got disconnected. I will start, sir. Sir will join.
Is it due to? Is it from my connection?
Yeah. Yes, sir. It's echoing.
Suppose I have joined from YouTube.
Sir, you have two systems. One is both are connected. I think one is looping with the other and that is causing echo. Yeah. Now should be okay, sir.
Yeah, I minimized and joined again. I think that is why it is same link only.
Okay.
Now I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay.
Told me you will be seen twice.
Okay. Sir, we'll start, sir.
We can start. I think Dina has joined, I think. No? Or Luis also
Yeah.
can start.
Yes, join, sir. Yeah. Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the Forefront of Future Frontiers, the medical webinar series. We are now in series 10. The theme for series 10 is how we can enhance the quality and safety of care for our patients in the healthcare system. So that's the theme we are exploring. We have had quite a few talks in this particular theme, and today we have one very interesting talk on how to improve safety in surgical fields, how to bring in training in the form of simulation in surgery, and how it can enhance the quality of and safety of care in surgical patients. And we have with us Dr. Ram Natraja. He's a pediatric surgeon from Monash University, Australia. He'll be delivering the talk. I'd request our Dean, Dr. Kotur, to welcome the speaker. And after that, we'll proceed to introduce him. Over to you, Dr. Kotur. He has some issues, Vishnuvat sir. Can you welcome the speaker so that I'll go on with that?
Oh, some other thing. Sir, shall I talk
You
then?
can go. Yeah, please.
So, on behalf of Dean and management, I welcome Professor Natarajan. So, it's a very great event for us because you will be talking about usage in the skill learning on simulation, because this is an important, especially when the cases are not easily available, and also it's a surgical skill which probably cannot be taught easily with the live patients. And in this simulated model, people can practice as many times as they want, and also they can become themselves well acquainted with the procedure before they actually go into the real patients. This your screen has gone.
Yes, sir.
So he has done his bachelor degree in medicine and surgery. I thought he will speak in Indian accent, but he's in the Western accent. So he's been trained in UK, and he has done molecular medicine and basic medical sciences. And post-grad training he has done in pediatric surgery, and is director of surgical simulation and innovation. And anywhere in the Western country and developed countries, I think yes, simulation and skill learning on simulators has become more important, and they've got a vast experience. And in India also, because of COVID situation, we are in a situation where we cannot directly handle patients in many situations, and also crowding and management also becomes an issue. So I think under these circumstances, this simulated patient learning is very important. And he has worked in various places, and he's also trained in the Royal College of Surgeons, and he is presently in a country lead for Myanmar Children's Hospital, and he's also a temporary advisor for WHO on simulation, and definitely will be benefited by his expertise. And he has got several accomplishments, like he has written 8 book chapters, 65 peer-reviewed publications, and several international conferences. I think any surgical conference will not be there without simulation being shown, because many issues may have to be shown, and often there will be a workshop on simulators also. And he has conducted 11 courses in the country over the last 4 years, and various education and clinical awards. I am sure that he will visit Pondicherry and AVMC and give training to us also in this field. So thank you, Ram Natarajan, for being with us and obliging us to come over here, on the, if not in real life, on the web.
Thank you very much, sir. Before we proceed, we'd just like to give a little brief about what work Dr. Ram has done. He actually is very interested or passionate about simulation and how we can take simulation for safety of surgical procedures in developing countries. So when we were in that Harvard Macy project course together, he was in the same group. We were supposed to present a project, and his project was how to take simulation and make it really low cost for the developing countries. And he has done extensive work in Myanmar as Monash University lead for this particular thing. So that's why we requested him to share his extensive experience on how to plan for these sessions and how to bring this into surgical education. So with that introduction, we'd request Dr. Ram to take the stage, and we request all participants to keep themselves muted so that the audio quality is good for everyone. And this session is being recorded for the sake of academic purpose and for later use. Over to you, Dr. Ram. The stage is yours.
Dean wants to tell something, or some problem there, Dean?
He has some issues with him.
Fine.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It was a great honor to get the email from you, from a fellow Harvard Macy scholar, to share my experience in this space. And I think as the kind introductions have said, that simulation is certainly coming more to the fore with medical and surgical education. So hopefully this will give you a bit of an overview on what we're doing at the moment, but also what is possible both at both ends of the spectrum as well. So I'll just share my screen now, which is here. Let's have a look. Good. Can everyone see that? Very good. So this is kind of far-reaching things. So I'm going to be talking about simulation-based education and also the use of technology to improve clinical outcomes. And I'll be drawing on some of our experience with Myanmar, where we've actually had some good data come through for actually improving clinical outcomes because of low-cost simulation as well. But we'll come on to that. Certainly, it's traditional here, and I'm sure it's traditional in your country as well, but I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm gathered on today and acknowledge your elders past, present, and emerging as well. So this talk, I was going to talk about 5 different domains, and I think I certainly left some time for questions at the end, and I do welcome questions then. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about, what is simulation? What are some of the educational theories underpinning it? An overview of some surgical simulation examples that you may be able to apply. How can technology be harnessed in either a low and middle income setting or high income setting? I'm going to be talking a bit about the future, which we're using. A lot of our projects are now using wearable technology and how we're going to apply that to simulation. And then talk a bit about on the global surgery stage, as we said, actual proof of clinical outcomes improving because of a surgical simulation intervention. So what is simulation? So I'm not sure, some of you probably will recognize this gentleman here, but he was William Haustead, who was one of the pioneer surgeons in America, who formed many things. He was a godfather of surgery there. He was the founder of one of the Johns Hopkins institutions there, and has certainly formed the backbone of what we do. And I'm sure you've all heard his expression, see one, do one, teach one. Although it doesn't feel that long ago when I started surgical training in 2002, certainly that was still very much prevalent within our training program. It's interesting when you look at it, though, that the other things that William Haustead actually pioneered as well was the use of antibiotics, to wash your hands before doing an operation, to wear surgical gloves, and to not use the blood-splattered aprons as well. So I think that for those other things that he pioneered, it's almost unbelievable that we would not use them today. Yet we are still in many areas still clinging on to his expression for training, which is see one, do one, and teach one. So why simulation? So simulation, usually I say, you know, people have flown to this, but this is the beauty of the paradigm shift where we're virtual conferencing. But simulation is for people to train, and we learn from the aviation industry. So simulation not only teaches a pilot how to actually land a plane or to fly a plane, but also those really ingrained technical and non-technical skills that allow them to land a plane when something untoward happens, like a sudden gust of wind blows them off the tarmac. Because it's not so necessarily the straightforward flying the plane that's an issue. It's more about the fact when things go wrong. And that happens in our world as well. So it's not just the routine operation, which we need to make a difference. It's actually the operation where things go wrong. And bear in mind, pilots do thousands of hours of training before they're actually allowed to fly a plane. It's the same for, this is the Royal Albert Hall. For those of you who've been to London, it's near where I grew up, and it's an amazing place. But certainly if you were playing your musical instrument at this high level, you wouldn't just turn up on the day and expect to play it and play it to a good degree. So you do practice as well. Same with Usain Bolt. He doesn't just rock up on the Olympics and just sprint and then win all these gold medals. He practices, he trains, he really drills himself with that. And so should we. And this drilling is actually one of the first educational theories I introduced, which probably as surgeons we always know. So that's deliberate practice. And this was Anders Ericsson, who basically said that it's the active engagement and deliberate practice. And that's where you're actually focused on doing a task. You do the task, you get feedback, you problem solve, you evaluate, then you repeat the performance again and again and again until you actually gain competency. And this is a graph which has basically been applied to surgical training, where people say that the peak of your career comes sort of after about 30 years or so, but it actually takes you 10 years or a certain number of hours to reach that international level. But as our understanding increases, what we actually realize is that different people have a different curve. So people will reach the international level and the peak of their career at different times, and different people will actually need different trajectories to maintain that. This is mastery learning by James Block, and this is where actually we can scaffold things. So where we actually then you achieve one target, you deliberately practice until you get to the next target, and then the next target along. And these are the two main educational theories that underpin our surgical training, but there are many, many more that underpin what we do. And I'm sure all of you who are actually educators in the medical and surgical fields will actually probably use them already, although you may know them by different names. So what is simulation-based education? So my definition for it is the acquisition of essential technical and cognitive skills in a safe, controlled learning environment prior to patient contact, hence ensuring patient safety and clinician preparedness. And I say cognitive skills because I like the traditional way to describe them is non-technical skills, but I feel that non-technical implies that they're not as good as technical. It kind of downgrades them a bit. You got the technical, then you got the non-technical, but actually they're cognitive skills and they're very important. So what is it? Bench trainers, part task trainers. I'm sure you've all seen these kind of mannequins. You've practiced on them. You've probably used laparoscopic simulators as well in your practice, and these are all part of simulation. We use scenario-based for a common thing for us would be APLS or ATLS or BLS, where we use a mannequin to practice resuscitation based around a scenario. We have screen-based learning, which is incredibly more prolific now in the era of COVID, and certainly all of our educational meetings are now, and courses are actually being moved online, and we're actually now running huge portfolios of programs just based on screen. We have hybrid, and this is where you're using an actor with a synthetic put onto them, where the trainee has to suture the wound closed while talking to the patient who is anxious, and you can really up the ante of how that simulation goes. Cognitive skills, and those are the things that really make a difference, because when you do a root cause analysis of critical events in an operating theatre, which is my world, the majority of them aren't because the equipment didn't work. There was a lack of surgical expertise. It's usually a Swiss cheese effect, but it's usually because of lack of communication, situational awareness, or other factors that come along there. But they can be taught in sim as well. And I think everyone thinks that simulation may be just based within the virtual reality space, but it doesn't have to be. And that's where hopefully one of the take-home messages of this talk will be. And also sim patients, incredibly powerful, but it's a new form of simulation where they're actually now becoming a professional entity, where they actually train not just actors who help us, but they're actually based as simulated participants as well. So see one, do one, teach one? Not quite, and we're not trying to actually just recreate the surgery itself or the procedure or the intubation or all those other factors. We're actually trying to create everything around that as well. This picture sums up for what I think simulation is, and this is Maurizio, who's one of my close academic colleagues, and this is when we were running a trauma workshop in rural Gippsland, so right out in the heart of the countryside in our state of Victoria. Very under-resourced, and we're obviously teaching medical school students about trauma. What Maurizio is showing here is the intraosseous needle insertion, a procedure that's life-saving, where you have to really screw a needle into the bone of a child just below the knee, just to give them fluids if you can't get intravenous access. But if you look at the students' expressions, you can see those are the kind of reactions I want students to have in a safe environment with a mannequin, and not where actually they need to do this procedure to save a child's life. I don't want them to have those reactions there. Very good high fidelity simulator, and this is it here. But actually what it is, and this is where we come into the low cost, it really teaches them how to do it. You've got the hard stuff, and then you get it really crunch as it goes in, but it's a chocolate bar. I'm not sure you have them in India, maybe you do, but crunchy bars. So honeycomb center surrounded by chocolate, and we wrap them up in elastoplast. And actually the fidelity of putting the needle through that, you have the resistance of the elastoplast, and then it suddenly gives way into the crunch as you did for the bone, going through into the cortex as well. Very high fidelity, very low cost, and it works. Well, we do have high technology, and this is Sim Junior. And Sim Junior is the good realism in terms of it, how it looks, the pupils and everything. And I can control it with my control rooms here and control the heart rate, the blood pressure and all those things. But actually this is expensive. This is 80,000 Australian dollars. And for that, I do use it. But actually you can train a lot more people with less money, with just more educational design. So this is the non-technical skills or cognitive skills, and this is my, it looks relatively empty. This was after we just opened. It's a lot fuller nowadays, but this is my operating theatre space. But here, when people see it, they always say, oh, this must be where you teach surgeons to operate. And I say, no, it's not. I can teach surgeons to operate at home using laparoscopic remote training. This is where I teach them decision-making, interprofessional skills, crisis management, leadership skills, team working, situational awareness and communication, all within a safe environment. Real factors that really can make a big difference to patient outcome in a safe environment. And you can have the team of anaesthetists, the surgical team, you have the nursing team, all interacting and actually giving different scenarios as they go through to teach students and surgical trainees, medical trainees, anaesthetic trainees, all these essential skills. So let's go through some examples of certainly my world of surgical simulation examples. And I'm certainly using my hat of a surgical simulator here rather than as a medical educator in the Department of Pediatrics. But whenever we think of simulation, we think of that high fidelity, that stuff that looks real, the virtual reality, the robotic surgery. Those are the kind of things, the really high cost things that we think of. But this is where it started for me. This is my double glove model, which we designed with Joe Curry, one of my close mentors at Great Ormond Street in London in 2002. Very low cost. In those days, this is Barrett doing the procedure. We had to go after hours. You might recognize the old store stack systems. I had to bring a supply of chocolate to the theatre staff to let me use them and promise them that I wouldn't break anything. And we had to do this all out of hours, and we had to do it all within there. And that was our first validation study. Now we've got these portable bench trainers, which I'll show you how we apply them, which cost about $1,000. We can use them with any tablet and have exactly the same capabilities as what we used in that setting back in 2002. This is a video of the double glove, and you can see here actually what it is we're dissecting out the oval, so the red oval in the middle. The inner glove is filled with water, so you don't want to perforate that inner glove. And you don't want to deviate from the red line either. And this is teaching all of the essential skills, or many of the core skills, that you need for laparoscopy. But it doesn't look like an operation. It doesn't look like anything that we would do. Although I'm a pediatric surgeon, I can never say never. There may come a time when I need to dissect a glove out of a child if they do something funny. But this is not actually looking like we'd expect a real operation to look. But it confers the skill that we need to do it. It confers a 2D to realization and all the other ones that we'll talk about in a minute. And we validated this, and I think this is also part of my journey, is that it took us about 3 years to get these both papers actually to published with Joe and myself. And it was rejected from journals saying this is nonsense. You have to teach surgeons how to operate in an operating theatre. There's no place in medicine for this. So even in my short career so far, I'm very glad that we've come to a point where now globally we're thinking about surgical simulation and actually incorporating these new practices within all of our medical student and postgraduate training programs. And these are the kind of simulation that we use. Again, doesn't look very specific to what we would do, but these are all low cost. Dissecting paper, threading the laces, putting rubber glove caps onto pegs, folding bits of paper, putting them through pegs, stacking dice, untangling paper clips, and the double glove model. And these are just a few examples of very low cost laparoscopic simulation that works very well. You'll notice in these that for the majority of them, I've actually got a red and a blue color on the instruments themselves, and we'll come on to that just in a second. And you can see here, this is part of our example of our courses in Myanmar, where we can go anywhere in the world, and you can actually, without electricity, although you have lighting here, we can set up these simulators using portable power sources and tablets to actually teach all these laparoscopic skills at the back of a classroom in the middle of a hospital in downtown Yangon. And you can see people are having fun. People are getting engaged with it. They're learning, they're teaching. We can demonstrate on it. And we did donate quite a few of these to them. And until the recent unfortunate events there, they were actually building up and up with their surgical simulation program. But of course, this is the high fidelity. This is what I do in my center, where we have the big sort stacks, and we actually do our own simulators there covered in the drapes. Gives the better fidelity where you've got someone holding the camera while you're using it. And that's the other end. So you can be both ends of the spectrum for laparoscopic sim. We have an expensive stack, you've got laparoscopes, but you can do it in a box trainer. So we train our trainees on a stepwise approach, as we said, building up the blocks as we go. They start on the basic simulator, they then move up to more and more complicated things as they go. And this is the lid. So this is the lid we designed, and this is a small MDF triangle with some holes cut into it. We then cut a glove off. We put the fingers of the glove in the holes, stretch it across there, and that gives one side of it, which is an inguinal hernia repair in a child. So you can see here on the other side, we just put some neoprene on. And you can see here, this is actually two of our common procedures. So the top one's a congenital diaphragmatic hernia repair. And you can see that actually the model there is tying a suture with a slip knot under tension. Now, bear in mind that I'm suturing this diaphragm closed in the top image in probably a baby's chest that is smaller than my fist. So it's a very small space where I'm operating, and I'm actually suturing, and the needle looks huge, but it's a tiny needle because of the magnification, it looks huge. So what do? I'm a good surgeon, I hope, and I'm sure that my outcome's as good as anyone else's. But before I do a thoracoscopic diaphragmatic hernia repair, I go to my model. And I actually fire off 30 of these special sutures. So when then I do it in the patient, it's the best suture that I can do. So it's not just about acquiring those skills, it's about actually maintaining them as well, and for warm-up exercises. And why do I do that? Because not every congenital diaphragmatic hernia is suitable for thoracoscopic repair. If they're not suitable for every 4, so I'm can. You can see the inguinal hernia here, very low cost, where we're doing a purse string model and going around. Now you may say this looks all like a bit of fun. You're just playing around with a bit of neoprene and a glove that you cut in half, but there has to be evidence behind it. So we run also validation studies, and we put 109 surgical trainees through on the lid model. We tested our scoring systems. So we looked at how many times did they rip the glove? Was the knot sound? Was it watertight? Were the sutures, did they go down? Did they break? We have a scoring system, put 109 trainees through it. And you can see here, it differentiated between those 3 groups, from the novice to the intermediate to the expert. Bit of crossover in the intermediate group, because that's, it's very easy to define a novice. It's very easy to define an expert, because they're 2 ends of the spectrum. In between, it's a very mixed bag, but that was still significant. And we obviously published it, and it was all significant. So it does work. So not only is designing these low-cost simulators, it has to be on a good basis that is actually validated as well. And the double glove, so we're doing all of these things. So some are specific, some are not specific to operations, but it teaches us the 2D to 3D realization. Altered hand-eye coordination is no direct visualization of the operating field. The increased fine motor skills as we've got longer instruments which amplify our hand movements. The fulcrum effect, when I move right, the instrument moves left. And your brain has to get used to that as well. You don't have as much haptic feedback. You have altered depth perception, and all of those things you can teach within laparoscopy. So although these don't look like an actual operation, all of these skills can be picked up before you get to the patient and can be tested and assure that you have, which means when you do go to the patient, instead of having 10 things to deal with, the trainee only has to deal with 2 things. And that's the thing for the hernia model. I put my trainees through it because we're the only center in Australia who does the laparoscopic hernia repair in children. not because we're particularly special, but just because I trained in England and we do them all laparoscopic in England, but not in Australia. So my trainees go through that. When I'm happy they're good on the simulator, they go to the patient. And the thing they find difficult is the interaction with the peritoneum and putting the ports in. The only two things that we don't do, the suturing, the purse string, the tissue handling, all of those other things they're happy with and they actually do perform quite well. So surgical simulation is the acquisition of core surgical skills in a safe environment. You can do feedback, deliberate practice, maintenance of these skills, and you can also test novel technology and techniques as well within a safe environment before going to the patient. So let's go talk about technology and how it can be harnessed. We talked a tiny bit there. So I'm going to talk about my Myanmar experience, obviously, and my great faculty I've got there. But things have actually changed before we get on to Myanmar with COVID, as I'm sure we're all sitting here today. And as we were saying, I think if it hadn't been pre-COVID, it would obviously take a lot longer to organize and obviously travel. So it's a great honor to join you guys today and be able to share these thoughts with you because of technology. So there have been some positives and we have to take away positives to everything bad that's happened to us recently. But with COVID in Australia, I've changed my whole laparoscopic training program online. So we do laparoscopic training, the students do that at home, and I run webinars. So you may now be saying, this is a bit crazy. What does it mean he's doing laparoscopic training at home? Well, these are the people that we've had. Every state in Australasia so far have joined us, all successfully going through the program. And how we do that is we have an online training program. They actually have simulators within their home. They log on to my training curriculum, they go through it. They do all the tests and as they go through, and they get metrics. So you can see here at the bottom of the left hand of the screen, I get metrics for them because I get their distance, their handedness, their off screen, the distance between the instruments, the speed, acceleration, and motion smoothness because of the motion tracking they've got there. So not only do I watch their videos as I do, you can see the assessed candidate on the right hand side of the screen. I get their time, I can give them grades for the different domains, I can give them written feedback, but I can quantify that. So it's not just me subjectively looking at their performance, it's about actually getting objective proof with technology as well. And this is low cost, it's in their houses, they run through a 6-week training program and their laparoscopic skills increase. And big credit to my Myanmar faculty who are going through some horrific times at the moment. And Yinmar, who's one of the best educators I worked with, who was our educational lead there. And until the unfortunate events with the military coup, certainly we were moving to actually do a remote laparoscopic skills program there with them as well. So between UM1 and Monastery Simulation, we were using that technology to actually build up, but unfortunately that's obviously now all on hold as well. And this is thanks to a lot of philanthropy within the country at that point, where when we first started, we were in a dark room at the back of a lecture theatre, but now there's actually a simulation, or I hope it's still there, a very large simulation lab within the heart of Yangon, with importantly good internet capabilities, which we were going to capitalise on. So I wish my Myanmar colleagues well. It's, a day doesn't go by where I'm not thinking of them and certainly stand with them during these difficult times. So I'm going to do a bit of a segue just into different things here and think about 3D printing. Now, this is Paul McMenamin, a close colleague of mine, and he does some amazing work with 3D printing, and you can see what he prints here. And it's amazing stuff. The kind of the fidelity which he uses with his 3D printer are amazing. You may look at these and go, how is this actually relevant to us? But Paul, one of his big projects was he went to Liberia after the Ebola crisis, and he actually built up the anatomy training after Ebola because they were using cadavers, but all those cadavers were obviously Ebola victims. So what he did is he actually printed these, donated them, we got funds to do that, and he actually set up an anatomical training lab with these within country, and it meant that actually they could get access to good specimens. There was no requirements for storage of it, no threat of actually getting viruses or other things transmitted from them. They didn't need to be refrigerated, and there was no cost, no ongoing cost for it, because actually store cadavers is a huge ongoing cost for these institutions. So in partnership with high-income countries, you can set up labs within low and middle-income countries to actually continue to do good educational streams as well. And Paul's done a very good randomized controlled trial where he got our medical students to basically through 3 arms. He gave one group traditional cadavers for cardiac anatomy, one just with the 3D prints and one with a mixture between the two of them. And the most important thing is in the post-test scores, you can see actually it was the 3D print group who did the work best. And Paul thinks that this is actually because the students were interacting more with it. They were picking the prints up, they were looking at it, changing it around, really getting up close and looking at the actual anatomy, that they had a much more enriched learning experience because of that. Whereas with the cadavers, they're obviously sitting in these jars or they're there, it doesn't give you the same level of interaction as you do. Again, has to be based on evidence as well. And we've done 3D printing. This is a colidocal cyst that I excised, which was one of our first case stories, where we actually used preoperative imaging to actually generate a pretty accurate replica of the colidocal cyst before I excised it, and we compared it afterwards. So we're certainly moving towards not only education, but also bespoke patient planning. And I'd love the day, which we're moving towards, where I can get the 3D printed model for a patient's anatomy, which is actually consistent of the same type of tissues with the same fidelity, that I can do the operation on the 3D print before I do it on the patient. And I think that'd be incredibly, and that's coming. We are making a lot of big strides in it, and I say we, it's more my very clever colleagues at Monash University who are doing this in conjunction with me for that. So the future directions, so you can see here, this is 3D printing with the latex for duodenal atresia repair. And it's good, but not actually as great as it can be. And this is obviously the duodenostomy that we do, because the needle does cut out. But you can see here, this is one of the other projects, a student that I supervised, who was doing some very good 3D printing with more malleable, more realistic type synthetics as well. And this is for difficult airway intubation, and this was Matthew did some excellent work with this. So let's talk quickly about wearable technology. So wearable technology is something, so whenever Microsoft gets involved in something, that's when things expand. And we are very much in medicine often on the coattails of these kind of things. And this is where mixed reality headsets, this is where they're called mixed reality because you can still see your normal visual field, but the headsets drop holograms within it. So you can still see, so it's mixed, whereas augmented reality is where you're looking through a computer screen or you're looking at the slave unit or robotic and it has images on it. This is where you're seeing the real world, but it's dropping things in. Why has this become successful? What's driving Microsoft behind it? For some of this may resonate with some of you, it's Minecraft. So this is a huge industry where people are now doing Minecraft around a table, doing it with holograms as it's projected onto the table. So let's capitalize on these kind of things where that's so much money going into it for the gaming industry, and we can capitalize on it for simulation as well. And this is a video just to show, it's from CEA Healthcare. And you can see here, this is the real mixed reality. You've got a mannequin, which is a pregnancy mannequin. You can see this is the interaction with the holograms. And you can see the baby is actually then projected onto it. And this is for shoulder dystonia, where then actually you get the hybrid simulation between mixed reality. You see the head coming out. Can you see how the hologram rotates with the head as well? It then gives you, when they're pulling the mannequin and trying to deliver the baby safely, you can then see the pressure, the neck force indicators that comes through. You can see what happens with the hip as well. So the hip's getting more dilated. That's why you're putting the legs up. So this is the new generation of where we would do mixed reality. This is where it's coming and where it's very exciting for that as well. There have been some very good studies with actually dropping 3D CT scans for orthopedics onto bad fractures. And you can see here a surgeon by Pratitol is actually looking at the holograms projected onto a patient to help guide the surgery. And what are we doing at MCS for this? So this is me with some of my medical students we have quite a lot of research students who come through us. And this is John, who's in the background, who's very good at these things and actually spent a year with us doing this. So I'll present some of his work to you. But what he actually did for the motor project is that, and we credit to a VARS unit who designed some software for us, but we got different trainees and experts to basically do tasks. 2 of them were manual dexterity, 2 were more surgical specific. So instrument tying, hand tying, and then some surgical dexterity tests. The images here, is one of those things which John spent many a week trying to figure this out. But we did hand map, thanks to our technological colleagues. For the image capture, they're slightly off kill. But actually these holograms were exactly mapped to the hands. So we could then map the hand movement using the new software that we created for the surgeons. And this is the interface. You can see here, this is in the operating room, theatre, and Monash Children. You can see the drop-down menu. You can see the task there. You can see a little box around one of the tasks, because that's where it's centered in, where that's going to be the point of origin. And we had 34 participants of different degrees of surgical expertise going through. And you can see here that it was significant for the total path length for the left and right hands, irrespective of which hand you were. And you can see here also the total path length was significant, as well as the total time. So using the HoloLens, I can get objective data for actually people doing open surgery, as well as I can for laparoscopic surgery. So the next stage of the project is to get surgeons to wear these while they're doing procedures in the operating room and see whether they can quantify that. So we're no longer going to assess our trainees just on me looking at them and going, yes, I think that operation is quite good. I'm going to be quantifying it with objective data as well and putting them onto a scale, which they can then use for self-directed learning as well. I'm also doing a new test. So this is something that's for those of you who are surgeons, so 70% of surgeons will have problems with musculoskeletal problems moving forward. So we're using a ready-made sensor in the operating room to actually look for ergonomics. You can see here, this is me operating on a neonatal unit, and you can see our ergonomics aren't very good. So anything that we can do to improve this, we're trying to look into, because we have to work in very small confined spaces, because we have to go to the baby rather than the baby coming to us. So I'll keep you updated on that one. Again, low-cost sensors that we will use, but we're getting some interesting data from there. So that's wearable technology, and you can get an idea of where you're going. I mean, getting a few HoloLens headsets, the price will come down as they take off. People can get more. The price of HoloLens 2 is already less than HoloLens 1. So these kind of things could be where that's the next expansion. And there's some very good groups in India already who are using this, and certainly overtaking a lot of labs in Australia as well. So just to close, I'm just going to go through the example of which was actually my invite, thank you very much, to talk a bit about the global surgery and an interception project we had in Myanmar. And so why do we do global surgery? So global surgery, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is that essentially low resource settings are transitioning to new systems. There's educational reform, and simulation can supplement this, but they can also learn from the mistakes in high-income countries. So in England, when we first introduced lap cholecystectomies, there was a much higher rate of common bile duct injuries. Was that because the surgeons weren't good? No, it's because they weren't trained on the new equipment. So we can help people actually decrease the learning curves and actually learn from our mistakes of which we made for laparoscopy. Now, for interception, for those who don't know, majority are idiopathic, although they can be pathological as well, where you get little swellings of the lymphoid, hyperplasia within the bowel. The bowel then intercepts within itself, and it then blocks off its own blood supply, and you can get bowel necrosis and death potentially. And these are the little hypertrophied fibers. And you can treat it with an operation. You can do an operation either open or laparoscopic to actually remove it, and you can see the bowel intercepted there. But what we're doing in high-income countries now is an air enema, where we put air up the bottom and we push the bowel back the other way by inflating the air. And that can be done with water, hydrostatic, or air. We tend to use air enema primarily in our setting. And in our setting at Monash Children's Hospital, 90% of children will have an air enema and interception will go back. So a lot of children, it's now becoming a non-operative way to treat this. So what happens in low and middle-income countries in terms of where Myanmar is? Well, Myanmar, we have no idea. The data was very lacking. As you probably know, they came out of the military dictatorship only 10 years ago, and unfortunately they've gone back into it now with the junta. But it's a very big population, and there's only 9 pediatric surgeons, less so now actually. We did expand to about 17, but now we're not expanding as much. Vietnam, high incidence of interceptions compared to Melbourne, so we think this is a bigger problem than it is elsewhere. And Thailand, again, different data sets, but it is a problem, probably less so, but differing problems. And you can see that the air enema success rate is actually relatively high in this region, so potentially air enema would work in Myanmar. And why are we doing this? It's a big problem, as I'm sure you know, for the Lancet Commission as well. As you know, I probably don't need to say this is probably familiar in all of our minds as surgeons, but it's a huge problem, and where we're now moving away from vaccines towards more in terms of the actual global surgery. So this is our Myanmar program, and I think it's probably extended a bit from our days at the Harvard Macy Scholars. But this is actually the program which we've designed over the last few years. And as you saw from the introduction, we ran 11 courses in country. And this is the interception which happened at the beginning of those this program of courses. For the last 3 courses, we actually transitioned to my Myanmar faculty. So we handed them all the education equipment. They were now delivering things in country with our support rather than us delivering it. So certainly a very good step towards transition. And we were going to do the course in March until the unfortunate events, which was going to be virtual. So actually they were running it themselves. They're excellent educators, and they were then building forward. And the simulator, so this is Indy. I've traumatized my, I think she was then 2 or 3 years old. And she walked into the kitchen as I was drilling holes in babies. And she was like, "Daddy, don't drill holes, babies. No, the babies." As I was making holes in synthetic bowel out of stuff I got from a local hardware store. But essentially, I validated this, and we validated Indy. You can see the synthetic bowel on the X-ray here, and we tested it, the air enema technique in our setting, and we validated it with our own surgeons and the radiologists before going to Myanmar. And it cost $16, 16 Australian dollars to make. This is then we did an in situ simulation. We donated the machine for them to do it. We practiced in situ simulation and got them to all do it. We had videos playing of the actual different scenarios where it would either get reduced or not. And we also then had the x-rays they could see to make sure they were imaging the correct part of the baby as well. And what we did essentially is over the next 4 years is we collected data. We did a mixed method analysis. We did some structured interview with the Myanmar surgeons in 2020, so last year. And we also prospectively collected data as well. And what we saw is that there was a significant drop in the amount of babies having an operation in Myanmar following the introduction of this. You can see just over 80% down to about 56%, and it then stabilized over the next few years. And you can see also the non-operative rates obviously went up as that went down. But the intestinal resection rates also went up. And although it seems a bit counterintuitive, you want to resect more bowel because that means the right number of children are having an operation. If you're not resecting much bowel, and the reasons for that is necrosis stops the air enema from working. That therefore means that you're actually probably doing too many operations and not enough air enemas. And their results were excellent. Sorry, those are those 2 things. Low recurrence rates and very high success rate on par with high income countries as well. Prospective data possible because of our excellent colleagues on the ground, but very powerful that you can actually see in a simulation intervention actually worked. But this is important as well because it's not just that. It's not just about saving the children operations. It also has a knock-on effect. So here you can see the air enema group had a much decreased length of stay. Less need for antibiotics, less need for drips, less need for fluids, less post-operative ILS, less need for nutrition as well. All the other things that go through, they go home a lot quicker, frees up a bed, frees up staff, frees up everything else. Obviously, no surgical complications that you have to deal with either. So it has a big effect on the healthcare system as a whole. You can see 4 days as opposed to 7. But if you look at that spread, you can see the air enema is actually all with a nice group. And you can see some children stay for a month with the operative intervention. And the duration of symptoms was also significant. So there was a bit of patient selection in the fact that they had a longer duration of symptoms. They probably had an operation, but then that's probably okay in the initial stages as well. So we proved that on Kirkpatrick's level 4, we improved patient outcomes by a simulation intervention. And that's certainly something very powerful, which we should all try and achieve, but it's actually very difficult to achieve in many settings. We did the qualitative, and this really helped us get to the crux and really go to the data itself. And we figured out that actually a lot of the patient selection was that they could only do it within daylight hours, and that did explain a lot of the results we had. But these interviews gave us a lot more qualitative data, which I won't really have time to expand on today. So this demonstrated basically sustainability over the 4 years. Patient outcomes got better. using low-cost simulation and 16 Australian dollars to actually do it. And the machine we actually donated to them was actually designed by our Vietnamese colleagues who we've been working with over the years, and only cost $100 as well. So all very low cost. And we made sure that when they used it, they used the equipment that was available in country. And they've actually achieved international gold standards. And they're integrating into on their own self-delivered simulation-based medical training as they're going along. And as we said, far-reaching clinical effects as well. But there's also been a paradigm shift, and I think that the success of the simulation program in Myanmar was actually also down to the fact that early on we had a success. And that really helped buy into simulation, the fact that they could see that there was a benefit, they could see what was happening to the children, and they really could see that there was a difference there. And the mixed method approach is very good. I think as surgeons, we always cower away from qualitative stuff. We want our p-values, we want our data and our tables, but the qualitative is much more powerful in many ways, and combining the two is perfect. And it's also indicated that actually we don't need to push. Maybe the right number of children are having an interception because of late presentation in Myanmar, and that actually having, rather than 90% having it, which we have in our country, maybe actually having 50 to 60% having an error is actually achievable and actually the gold standard for that setting. So simulation, is it see one, do one, teach one? Probably not. It's see one, practice many and obtain feedback, and do one. Admit is not as catchy. I'm probably going to have to work on that to make it a bit more catchy, because see one, do one, teach one suddenly rolls off the tongue a lot better. So in summary, there's been rapid evolution of simulation-based education from my days of bribing people with chocolates to use surgical equipment. The evidence base is increasing, and we need to do that as well. It shouldn't just be us playing around with expensive toys. It should be us validating things, having good scientific basis, proving results, looking at clinical outcomes, and really proving that it actually has an effect. And it will be technological driven, but we can also harness new technologies from other realms. And low-cost simulation is very powerful and can be used in any setting. So wearable technology, I think, is going to be there. Pressure sensors, I think, I'm not sure about your group, but I think the majority of my theatre staff now have a tracker of some kind in terms of a Fitbit or, a step monitor and all those things. It's coming, everyone's having it as well. And we need to harness these technologies for clinical gains. So thank you very much. Thank you very much again for the invitation to talk. It is a great privilege to do this, and also a great sign of where we are in the world, that we can do this and share ideas and cross-pollinate between different groups of people in different parts of the world easily now. And this is where, obviously in the Children's Hospital, this is where Darth Vader then borrowed our simulation center to then give a bit of a prep talk to his troops about how he was actually defeated Obi-Wan there, for anyone else who's as big a geek as I am. So thank you very much, and I probably should, I think we're okay on time to open it for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Ram. That was a very nice talk, and it actually took us through what is an introduction to surgical simulation-based surgical education, and then you shared your experiences of building in low cost as well as moving on to the high end of the spectrum. Actually, what stood out for me from the entire talk was that actually there's one very nice paper which came out quite some time back about it's simulation which counts, not the mannequins. It was titled that, and it came from, I think, John Hopkins. So your glove model, what you bribed your staff nurses to do, the double glove model. I think that proves that point very nicely. And the other thing which is a basis what we keep telling in surgical or in any simulation-based education, it is that fidelity which counts rather than actually the cost of the mannequin. Like that, your example of the 3D mannequin, I think, was a perfect example to go by that. I have one question. Like, it was very interesting that you had plotted the novice and intermediate and expert surgeons with regard to the time taken, hand movements, expertise in getting them again, retraining and going before a major case, etc. What is the acceptability, especially with regard to maintaining or continuous skill maintenance from the groups? I'm sure the residents and the trainees would accept it much more readily compared to the maintenance of skills particular perspective.
That's an excellent question, because it's There is a resistance, you're right, for experts to do that. It's almost like we cross that magical threshold when we become a consultant, where we don't need to train anymore. And I think that certainly the maintenance of skills is something that there is a resistance to, and I'm not sure why, because I'm a consultant surgeon. I get very good results, but I like to maintain my skills as well. I like to practice, and I think, the same way, like the parallel with playing an instrument, or playing chess or things like that as well. You do have to practice as well. So I think for me, I try and put aside my inner resistance to that by putting my patients first and saying, actually, this is going to benefit my patients. It's not anything to do with me. But you're right, there have been some qualitative studies from surgeons, and there's a bit of resistance. It's kind of like, this is all training to get to a consultant, but when you're a consultant, you don't need that anymore. You're there, you can do whatever you want. So I think you're right, it's interesting. And I think so the two ways that we have to do it is, and I think certainly we're winning over the trainees and the medical students coming through now, because actually my medical students, I don't know about yours, are demanding this. They're demanding things that they want to do things. They're very dedicated and self-directed learners. They know about simulation. They want to do things and things like that. And so the demand is there for them, and actually the trainees are now demanding more. So I think that's where surgical simulation is building up, and it's gaining momentum as we're seeing. And now we have to work on our trainers as well. So we have to maybe change people from a educator or to a trainer, or a trainer to an educator. What I mean by that is that we're all trainers, so all surgeons will train people in the operating room, but actually they're not necessarily educate their trainees at the same time. That's looking at a more wider thing. So I think it's a great question. I think you're right. We have to now concentrate on ourselves to concentrate in actually changing our shift and the paradigm shift as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are in COVID times. We could equate this with herd immunity, right? So they say that if you can immunize 80% of the population, the virus is not going to do. So if we can actually immunize 80% of the senior surgeons to accept to newer technology, then the system per se will change, and we would go into Kirkpatrick's level 4 for almost all our interventions. Oh, thank you very much for answering that question. Dean sir, you want to say something? I think your voice is not audible, sir. Your voice is not audible. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any questions in the chat box. Dr. Vishnu, but any reactions, comments, feedbacks, questions?
Yeah, the talk, as you said, was very interesting. I had one question in the sense, mostly we train them in the skill labs, or after the skill lab, they have experience in the real life also before they get certification.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think as with one of the reasons I put the building blocks up there is that's what we do. So an example is, say, my inguinal hernia, where I get my trainees to use the model. They then operate with me and they see me doing it. And you can see that they go, this looks really easy. You just go around, how difficult can it be? So there is a stage in the learning cycle where then you then have to get them to have a go. They do the real operation in the clinical setting, and then they go, oh, actually, it is more difficult than it looks. Okay, I need to go back to, and obviously you do that under supervision so the patient's safe. But then they need to have that balance between the simulation lab and the operating theatre to then realize where they are. I think that comes to where they're sort of an unconscious competent or incompetent, where they don't know that they can't do it, and they see people doing it saying, oh, it's very easy. So you do need to have that combination of the both, and that's very much key. So thank you for highlighting that.
Do the patients cooperate with people for examination? Because I've seen one article where many Western countries, people even qualify the undergraduation without even seeing patients sometimes.
Wow.
So not all places, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? I think I can't imagine qualifying without seeing real patients. But I think that the one thing, although obviously I'm very biased towards these techniques, but I think that the best way I could sum it up is that these are never meant to replace clinical teaching or clinical experience. They are all techniques to supplement it and make it better. So I think that, as you said, if some places are training without seeing patients, that horrifies me, because it has to be a balance between all of it. And these are all techniques that we can use in the same way that we can give our students a textbook and say, you need to look at this, or an operative book, and you need to go through it. But it has to be all in conjunction. And these are all tools that we can use, but they're never tools that you can use just by themselves. So they have to be all in conjunction, the same way that you wouldn't just train someone up in the clinical field without getting them to have background knowledge to read and get or improve their basic science skills as well. So you wouldn't do that either, would you? So I think that you're right. It has to be a balance between all of them. And certainly, although I think I have been called a simulation a bit sort of fanatic at times, but it's for me, it has to be combined together and to supplement real clinical exposure and to enhance that clinical exposure, but never replace it.
Yeah, Dr. Ram. Look, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you are audible, sir.
Oh, yeah. So, Dr. Kotambi, he was to welcome me in the beginning. This technology took me here. Okay. Anyway, I have one excellent lecture. I really envy that you are working in such a high technology environment. It's only for us a pictures. Now my question is fine. Some issues are the fidelity versus validity, and another one is reliability and uniformity. See, these will vary. Suppose fidelity goes on increasing every time you alter the fidelity, you will have to have the validity off and on. You have to test it. These relations are there, and to complicate further, the feedback to the person who is getting trained. So these issues, what are your thoughts? The instructor has to be like a good teacher. He's accredited, he's trained, he got a feedback like that. The instructors for this training also need to be kind of standardized. So these will have all indirect bearing, a direct bearing on overall outcome of how well a surgeon gets trained in this environment.
Yes. Very, very valuable points, and I agree. And I think I could probably talk for hours. I wrote a very long essay about the differences between fidelity and realism and functional task alignment, all of which go there. And I think you're right. But I think that as faculty, investing in your faculty and training them is key as well. Because I've seen some anaesthetists train people how to intubate because they're excellent educators on a bottle of Coke. Whereas I've seen people fail to do it on a high-tech simulator, which is really, really high technology. So I think you're very much right. It's not just to do with the model. It's not, and there are other factors that come into it. It comes in the trainee themselves, whether they're in a good mental state to actually be trained, but also the faculty. And I think that we need to invest in our faculty and our teachers as well, as you said, because there's only so much you can do. And I think actually the quality of the teaching of the faculty is more important than anything else. And I think as we talked about, I think I've seen in simulation centers where they buy Sim Junior, say $80,000, and they sit around and look at it and go, okay, what are we going to teach on this? Whereas what they should be saying is, what do I want to teach? And what do I need to teach on? So instead of buying the equipment, they should first think about what they're doing, which is what everyone at the university obviously does as educators. We think about what are our learning objectives and how can we achieve those. So I think those are very valuable points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. And what about the feedback,
The feedback, yes. Feedback. So yeah. So you saw in my definition, the feedback was very much a part of it. And I think it's very much, as we said in deliberate practice, is that feedback is there. Without feedback, no true learning can occur. So you're very much right. I think, you need to have that feedback. You need to have constructive feedback. You need to know how to improve. And so even if you're doing self-directed learning, even with technology, you need to have points. So that's why we do the webinars with our remote laparoscopic training. They work with themselves and they do a lot of hours on themselves, but then I then give them feedback via the online system, and then I give them live feedback during the webinars when I can see them live operating. So you're right, no learning can happen without the provision of good feedback, and actually that is key to all learning. So yes, no, that's yeah, I completely agree.
Thank you once again.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Then, Dr. Ram, I think that you nicely demonstrated that not only that you could achieve all 3 levels of Kirkpatrick's. Normally we do 1, we have no problems doing 2 also. Okay, change in behavior, sometimes mostly we are able to study and demonstrate, but it is the patient safety or change in patient outcomes which is difficult. And now that we need to show actually Kirkpatrick level 5, the modified Kirkpatrick's, which is return of investment.
Yes. Very true, very true. Yes.
And with not only level 4 but also level 5 of Kirkpatrick's. I think that is the takeaway from us. It is creativity which counts. It is fidelity which counts, and it is also the simulation part of it. Even if we are teaching a simple task training, but if we can actually make it go along with a case-based scenario, make it go along with a standardized patient who can give a history when you combine task training efforts. So I think that's the lesson we take from today's talk. Thank you very much for sharing our expertise with your expertise with us. And this is Dr. Mahalakshmi, Dean Health Professions Education, thanking everyone on behalf of the Scientific Society of AVMC, which is part of the Vinayaka Missions Research Foundation. Thank you, Dr. Ram.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this meeting.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
And bye. And for the information of the participants, we'll be having another interesting webinar next week. We'll communicate to you through email and our groups. We'll be sending the link for this YouTube link for today's session, as well as the participation certificate to all the people present in that. I'll be sending the YouTube link to you, Dr. Ram. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. We'll close this session today. Thank you.